What's up guys, MikeCoco back here, bringing you guys a new video on the second Britania arc that we received from the new event. It is quite unexpected and surprising to say the least. I wasn't expecting Nexon to give us another Mythic hero, but it is here and it does give us one more Mythic hero we can choose from the first batch of Mythic heroes. So again, like the previous video, the first Britannia arc, I will separate the categories into PvP oriented and PvE oriented, and possibly also free players that will not purchase a costume using soul gems and mythic essence, and those that will purchase a costume. So the first thing I want to say before I give any suggestions is that if you did not pick Michael from your first arc, I highly recommend you get it right now because Michael is super useful. He's good in Explore, he's good in Mythic Raid, or decent at least. He's really good in Arena. You're going to be using him pretty much everywhere, so it makes no sense not to get him. So if you did not get him from your first arc, highly recommended get Michael because it's pretty much a requirement at this point to beat at least floor 5 in my opinion, and he is used a lot in floor 6 um, of ruins, so definitely go and get him. And with that out of the way, the second point I do want to make is that if you do not have any good dispellers, that is the ones I can think of right now are Remy, Jury with a costume, Tehu with a costume, or Saint Ione. If you don't have any of those dispellers, I would recommend you pick a mythic hero that can dispel among the current batch from the Britannia arc. So basically, it's only Saint Ione in that case. So if you don't have a dispeller, get a dispeller, and if you don't have Michael, get Michael. So with that out of the way, let's go on into the actual selection of the Britannia arc. So let's see where it is. Okay, so if I want to categorize them into categories, I'm gonna do PvP first and then PvE after. So in terms of PvP for the free player, you don't have much of a choice. It's pretty much a toss-up between Tehu, DQK, and Saint Ione. The reason why is Saint Ione has a costume, and she is fairly useful in PvP. Why? Because in Arena and in other modes, her mythic skill heals up to 100k of HP for every single hero on your team. Now that'll be changed later to a 30% of your 30% heal, where the 30% is of your total HP. So I guess it's a decent trade-off. Like the more HP you have, obviously 30% is going to give you a higher heal versus a static 100k HP. But regardless of that, the HP buff is, or the heal rather, is extremely useful because even if Saint Ione dies, the heal still activates. Now, you guys might be wondering, it's only a 3-turn heal, it's not going to actually do anything. Most of the time in Arena, the fights turn out to be around 3 to 5 rounds. I haven't played a lot of battles where it exceeds 5 or it's like less than 2. And usually by like the third turn or maybe even the second or fourth turn, the battle is already decided, like pretty much who's going to win unless you have a really close battle. So the healing for 3 turns is not exactly a negative downside towards her heal. It's actually still very good. And she also provides a crit buff and a small attack buff, and with her costume, a small critical damage buff. Now, I did mention before that you can kind of substitute critical damage buff as a attack buff, as long as you have a guaranteed critical hit. And while that was true before when I said that, it may no longer be as true as I say now, because there are more heroes that are being introduced with the mythic skill that prevents you from being hit by critical hits. So the immune to crit skill. I think that's found on Pioneer right now, but that skill will be introduced into, I think, 2 or 3 more heroes later on. So Saint Ione might have a bit of trouble with them because her main component is the crit chance and then the increase in attack buff. The attack buff is only 20%, and the crit chance or the critical damage buff is 30%. But once you lose out on the critical hit, you lose out on the critical damage as well. So in that case, you're only going to have a 20% attack buff, which is not terrible. I mean, it's only 10% less than Raphael. And she can also, or Saint Ione at least, can also, where is she? Wait, her costume's not out yet. Saint Ione also buffs in a larger range compared to Raphael. So if you consider that, the worst case, it comes down to Saint Ione being a slightly weaker or more versatile version of Raphael. That's pretty much the worst case scenario. And she also dispels buffs, which is really good for Arena. Pretty much useful against Ella, Sword Main, Michael, and some of the other heroes that have provide themselves with a lot of buffs. So in Arena at least, Saint Ione is probably your top choice if we're considering free players because they don't have access to DQK's costume and they don't have access to Tehu's costume. So in that case, the number 2 spot goes to Tehu. Oops, what am I doing? Number 2 spot, excuse me, goes to Tehu because of his natural PvP skill. That's pretty much all that needs to be said. It's a increase in damage for him in PvP, and he takes less damage, and he cannot be critical hitted. So it's pretty much a win-win. The costume is not too useful if you already have a dispeller, because the costume only adds a dispel, which is, I mean, it's useful, but like if you already have a few dispellers, there's no need. Especially if you have someone like Remy already, or if you have Saint Ione or even Jury with the costume. Because if you don't have Tehu's costume, it's very likely you have, I think, Jury's costume. I think they were in the same box. I don't remember. It's been, I think, like a long time ago. Anyways, Tehu is definitely the solid number 2 pick for the free players. And number 3 goes to DQK, and the reason is because of her delayed dot. Now, without the costume, it's still dispellable, which is the main problem. However, if you manage to target multiple enemies, it's possible that the enemy you're facing does not have a dispeller or a cleanser, I mean. So they can't actually cleanse the delayed dot. Or if you target multiple columns, they either have to choose to either cleanse the column that's dying or cleanse the column that's being what's it called, that has the delayed dot status effect. So DQK without the costume, the delayed dot is slightly unreliable. But because she provides herself with crit and attack buff, and her myth skill increases the attack of all melee heroes, definitely will put her at number 3. Now, in the number 4 spot, it's pretty hard to tell at this point. None of the other heroes excel at PvP if you don't consider their costumes. I will say that Remy is probably still the best pick. However, I don't think Remy is too useful anymore, specifically because the requirement of having the enemies focused around her or cleansing around her is kind of a large requirement, especially because we have Blood Pearl who pushes back, we have Cannon Main who pushes back, and incoming we also have Aaron who is a very deadly PvP hero. And she gets a costume that also like randomly moves targets. So in that case, Remy's cleanse at least will be slightly unreliable because it could be the case that Remy's pushed away, and the heroes you want to cleanse are not within the vicinity of Remy anymore. But because of Remy's utility, I think she still gets number 4. And then at this point, it's pretty much a toss-up. You can go with either Sarah, Rag, or I would say probably Gabe. I think I don't remember if Rag's attack buff is at 75% or not without his costume. I think it might be capped at 50%. I don't remember. But in any case, those heroes are pretty much, they're all equivalent in my opinion. Gabe is less useful because he doesn't have an attack buff, but he does deal magic damage. Rag still has a decent attack buff because of his myth skill and because of his own attack buff. And Sarah again deals magic damage and also permanently increases the attack of, I think, tome heroes, or is it staff? I forgot which one. So that's why those 3 are tied. And then Uriel, Kamal, and Raphael are pretty much not worth considering. They're mostly PvE oriented heroes. Kamal can see some use because of her stun, but at that point you might as well just use Lucida because it's lower fury and it's easier to get. At least you don't have to waste a hero or waste a mythic hero just to get a one turn stun or 2 turn stun rather. So it doesn't make much sense. Now, if we consider with costumes, it gets shifted a little bit. I would definitely put DQK at the very top. Um, because the non-dispellable delayed dot is extremely powerful and it does a lot of damage. So DQK definitely goes to the top. Um, Other than that, I think Saint Ione would still probably. So DQK and Saint Ione would probably switch places, and Saint Ione would be second because again her costume is still very good. Tehu is probably third, and then at that point, I would definitely go with Gabriel because he becomes like Lucida except with Claire, and so that kind of damage is extremely powerful in PvP just because it's magic damage. And I think the rest of the list would remain pretty much the same. I don't remember if Sarah's costume is extremely good or not. Does it change from a row to a column? Or I mean a row to 3x3? Or does it, or I think it makes the attack buff go up to 75% and the defense reduction goes to 80%. So Sarah probably inches ahead of Rag in my opinion. Just a little bit if you're using magic heroes. Otherwise, Rag and Sarah are still at the same position. And Raphael, Kamal, and Uriel still not worth considering. And Metatron, honestly, as a free player, you should pretty much never get Metatron because she has no attack buff and she relies on other people providing her with attack buff. So you need people like Rag, you need people like who else provides attack buff these days? Saint Ione, um, probably like others I can't think of right now. Essentially, Metatron herself doesn't deal that bad of damage, but she needs a lot of buffers aside from just the crit buff that she has. She needs a lot of ranged attack buff, so you need to stack her with a lot of those in order for her to deal heavy damage. So that's why I don't recommend getting Metatron for free players. It's just not worth it. So I think that pretty much sums it up for PvP. In PvE, it's a little bit different. Uh, I would put DQK above Saint Ione in PvE. Depending on whether or not we have costumes available. So again, for free players, you only have access to Saint Ione's costume, so Saint Ione would still come first on the PvE list. DQK would be second because at the very worst case, she is a better Lucida. If we assume the worst case scenario and she has the delayed dot dispelled, then she still retains her attack buff and she still retains her critical hit. Um, so in that sense, she doesn't need anyone to provide her with crit. So that means less reliant on a crit buffer, and she provides herself with an attack buff. I think I said that already. So essentially, worst case is she's a better Lucida, or she's a Lucida that can always crit. That's the worst case scenario. So that's why DQK is second. And in terms of third place, it's actually kind of tough because the other heroes are sort of dependent on the mode in PvE. Because right now in PvE, there are 2 modes to focus on: Mythic Raid and Ruins. In Ruins, Uriel, Kamal definitely go up, and even Metatron and Sarah definitely go up in terms of versatility. But they are also a lot less useful in Explore because in Explore, you need mostly 200 Fury users. If you have 300 Fury users, it's kind of hard to cast your skills. So I would go with for PvE. I think I would go with Ragwell for PvE for the number 3, and then I would go with Kamal for number 4, and then Sarah and Uriel kind of tied for number 5. Because Both Sarah and Uriel hit in a 3x3, but they don't provide like enough effects for it to be useful. I don't even remember what Uriel's skill does because so few people actually use him. What is his skill? Increases. Actually, no. So he doesn't even have an attack buff without his costume. I thought he had an attack buff without his costume, but it seems like he only has increased damage to bosses. So in that case, all right, forget Uriel. Uriel goes way down. Um, what am I doing? So in that case, I would go with Sarah above Uriel, and then Uriel and Metatron are probably tied, and then Gabriel comes at the very end. Reason why is because Gabriel without an attack buff is literally just a glorified Claire, and even then, Claire gets a costume that makes her kind of equivalent to Gabriel in terms of fury reduction. It's just that her myth skill has 100 less fury in terms of grudge. So you start with 300 fury rather than 400, which I think you should be able to work around. It's not like a huge requirement to have Gabriel. And then I would probably put Remy and Tehu. The reason why I put Remy at the very end is because without a costume, she's no better than Party Ione. Right now in floor 6, I'm kind of bottlenecked at 6-4 because uh, if you're running a completely free-to-play setup, you're going to be low on Fury all the time. And so having Remy is not going to fix the problem of low Fury. So in that case, I actually think Ione is actually better than Remy in Explore, at least in floor 6. Um, so that's why Remy is kind of low, and she's also starting to be like less useful in Mythic raid as well. Especially if you have someone that has dispel, then you don't even need her for dispel. You just need a party Ione somewhere. Um, and then at the very end, Wargatehu, because obviously the entire hero is focused on PvP. He brings absolutely nothing to PvE except for the dispel, and that requires his costume. So that's pretty much it for the costumeless version. I think that's it. Now for the costumes, this makes it a little bit more tough because Gabriel jumps up a lot with a costume. Remy also jumps up a lot with a costume. DQK also goes up significantly. So does Kamal. And Rag sort of stays the same. I think he only adds an attack buff, and the fact that his attack buff, or I mean, a defense debuff, and he adds the fact that his attack buff lasts for 2 turns rather than 1 turn. But you're gonna be using his skill regardless. So in terms of costumes for PvE, I would say, this is a tough one. Because at that point, DQK becomes much more viable in PvE because you no longer have to worry about the delayed dot being dispelled because it's non-removable. So I would still put Saint Ione at the very top, and then I would probably go with DQK as second. Uh, it kind of depends on which mode you're focusing on. Saint Ione is definitely better for Mythic Raid, but DQK is definitely better for something like Explore, in my opinion, because Saint Ione won't see too much use in Explore, considering you need kind of like your Dispeller, and until we get a more solid way of getting a cleanse out of someone like Michael, I don't think we'll be giving up Ione anytime soon. So pretty much your healer or support in Explore is gonna be Ione, in my opinion, not Saint Ione, because she doesn't have that cleanse ability. So in that case, I would put DQK and Saint Ione as tied, depending on which PvE mode you want to focus on more. Definitely, it's a hard choice. I'm also debating which one is better. And after that, I would put Gabriel at the 3rd spot because as soon as he gets that attack buff, he jumps up incredibly. Because the attack buff, it just makes him a lot better. Plus the fact that he's magic damage, it's essentially combining Claire and Lucido, two of the most powerful heroes in PvE and in PvP. And you combine them into one, you get a really good hero. And In the fourth spot, I would definitely go with. Hmm. Fourth spot, I'd actually go with a tie between Remy, Uriel, and Kamau. The reason why is because Uriel and Kamau obviously are going to be dealing most of the damage, but if you don't have some kind of support already, then the two-turn cleanse is very good with Remy. So that's why I put those three together. Otherwise, if you already have support, Remy would definitely be under Uriel and Kamau because there's no use for Remy aside from that. And then I would go with Sarah as the next spot. Sarah or Rag. Probably Sarah for Mythic Raid, but definitely Rag for someone like Explore. Because again, the 300 versus 200 Fury cost makes a huge difference. Especially if you're not running any Grudge heroes, or if you're not running any single target Fury Thieves like Husky or Khalid or Tree Ant. And then at the very end comes in Raphael, and then uh, Raphael and Metatron again together, and then lastly we have War God Tehu. Because, like I mentioned before, Tehu's not too useful, and Metatron is severely underpowered without attack buffs, which is hard to get as a free player. So I think that's pretty much it for Britannia's arc. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. Covered most of the things. Essentially, I think that DQK is the most balanced pick. And the reason why I say that is because she's good in every mode right now. She can be used in Mythic Raid. She's going to be dealing less damage than someone like Kamau or Uriel, who are focused 3x3s. But Uriel and Kamau are not too useful in Arena, nor are they too useful in Explore. While DQK can be useful in Explore and can definitely be useful in Arena, even without her costume. Again, worst case is she becomes like a Lasita, uh, which is a Lasita that provides herself with guaranteed crit, which is still a lot of damage. So that's why DQK is a safe pick. If you want, I'm not sure if they're gonna give us another costume box for free. So it's like a spoiler. In Kalo, they gave away a free costume box. It was during an event or something. Um, and it allows you to choose one of the costume boxes from like starting at one hero to like the last mythic hero. Like I think it started at like it started at, I think at the first mythic hero all the way up to one of the latter mythic heroes like Nada or something. So if you do want to gamble on it, you could go with Gabriel and assume he gets his costume, because Gabe with costume is fairly good. I would definitely say top three in both PvP and PvE. So, or not even top three, maybe top four. I forgot about Tehu in PvP, but Gabriel is extremely good with his costume. But the fact that he doesn't have his costume makes him no better than a Claire. So it's a lot of a gamble. So safe pick, definitely go with DQK. If you want a costume for sure, then San Ione is definitely a good pick. Um, I can't see her being too useful right now in Explore, but in Arena, definitely useful, and in Mythic Raid, definitely useful as well. The only problem I have with her in Mythic Raid is that, uh, well, without her costume at least, the critical damage buff is only it comes along with her costume. So if you don't have her costume, you might as well just use Christine, because Christine has a guaranteed crit with her costume for one turn. So in that case, I would go with Christine. That's my only problem with Saint Ione, is that her crit buff is like kind of unnecessary if you have a lot of crit buffers already. Um, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it for Britannia's arc. So I'm gonna probably put a like a summarized list right now as I'm speaking onto the screen. And yeah, that's it for this video, guys. Peace.